Church outside of DC. I did not grow up to be a pastor. I didn't think I was going to be a pastor. I was in the Navy for 23 years working in the medical community. And about 3 years before I got out of the Navy, God kind of redirected my path, and through some amazing people like Will Johnston up at their website's theaterchurch.org.
National Community Church.
There you go, National Community Church. Got to have some amazing conversations about what it looked like to be a pastor. Stacy, thank you for telling me to hit record, but it's already recording. So I set it up automatically. I cheated. But thank you for reminding me of that. So yes, so you're being recorded. So if you want to say something, you know, offensive, let me know. I'll pause, then you can say it, and then we'll come back to record. So I got connected to the network through a guy that some of you may know named Rick Howerton. Rick was a big voice in the small group community. And he invited me to this event and said, there's two guys I want you to meet, named Steve Gladen and Bill Willett. And that's how I got connected into them, into the network. I did that when I was a volunteer leading groups at my church. The network saved my tail so many times, where I would reach out like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm doing. How do I deal with this? And so there are so many people in the network who are more than happy to give everything away. One, because we all stole it from Steve Gladen and Bill Willits anyway. And two, just because all of us have had people help us. And so it's our way of kind of paying back to the small group community. As I was coming on staff here at the church that I'm at, they had me take an assessment called the Enneagram. I had never heard of the Enneagram. I didn't know what the Enneagram was. So I took this assessment, and it told me that I was this number. I'm not going to tell you my number until the end. I already told you that. It told me that I was this number, and I was like, okay, so what does that mean? So I did a little research around that number. Then when I came on staff, everyone had been through Enneagram stuff. Everyone kind of knew their number. And I got really turned off on the Enneagram because it was used to do three things. It was used to label people, to go, oh, you're just a whatever. It was used to diagnose people. Oh, you act that way because of this, that, or the other thing, or you must be feeling these things. And it was used to excuse bad behavior. So, oh, well, I'm acting this way because I am a whatever number. So I got really turned off on the Enneagram. A couple of years later, another pastor on staff and I were having a conversation around that. And he said, so just because our church doesn't necessarily use it the way that it's intended to use doesn't mean that it couldn't be helpful for you. So I did some reading, did some research, talked to some people, and it has been super helpful for me giving language to things. And then it's also been helpful for me in groups. And I'll talk a little bit about how it's been helpful for me in leading my own group and in being a small group point person. So, but before we get on with that, because I don't know everyone's level of knowledge on the Enneagram, I'm going to talk briefly through all 9 types of the Enneagram. So I'm going to talk about, I'll tell you what it's usually called, what their primary need is, and what their biggest struggle or sin or passion, depending on what language you're using, is. You may have seen different things. So I'll talk through those. All right, so I'm going to start with 1, even though people say you're supposed to start with 8s because 8s always want to be first. So I'm going to start with 1 because, and here's why. 1s are perfectionists. I'm laughing. Nick's making a face because, anyway, 1s are perfectionists. So the 1's need is for things to be perfect, for things to be in order. So 1s really like it when you start with 1 as you're going through the numbers, because 1 comes first in order. And so that's where it should be. And so that is a 1. The 1's biggest struggle or sin is with anger and resentment, that they have to correct everything that everybody else keeps messing up. So in my mind, it's like President Business in the Lego movie. Like, why does everyone keep messing with my stuff? Like, the world is not perfect. Why do you keep messing with my stuff? So I have an 8-year-old son, so Lego references are all the rage right now. Number 2 is the helper. So if someone's a 2, they are a helper. Their need is to be needed. They struggle with understanding, who am I if I'm not helping somebody else? Their biggest struggle or sin is pride, because as a 2, they can't accept help, which means they don't have any weaknesses or need anything from anybody else because they are the helper. A 3 is the performer. So the performer's need is to be seen as successful and to be seen as doing things, to achieve things. Other times the performer is called the achiever. Their biggest sin or struggle is deceit, because it's all about image management for them. So it's not necessarily like outright lying, but it is shading the truth or twisting facts or those type of things to make it always appear in the best light for them. Number 4 is called the romantic. And that's not like romantic in love, but romantic as in like an artist. Like, I'll just leave it at that, like an artist. So their need is to be individually seen and understood. So that's why I use like an artist as an illustration. Artist wants to express themselves in a creative way, and that's romantic, right? Their sin or deeper struggle is envy or passion. 4s generally react negatively, at least initially, to the Enneagram because they like to be individuals and they get mad that someone has done a study and labels them as who they are. They're like, you don't know me. How could you say that about me? That's a 4. All right. 5s. Thanks, Nick, for letting everybody in. 5s are the observer. So these folks, their basically need is to understand or to have all of the information. So they like to collect information and have all of that. Their sin or struggle is avarice, especially around knowledge. They want more and more and more and more knowledge. 5s have one of the lowest energy level of folks on the Enneagram, which means they manage their energy. And so one of the reasons they want all of this knowledge is so they can make decisions about how much energy to expend or how much energy it's going to take for each one of these things. 6 is the loyalist. The loyalist, their biggest need is to feel secure, both physically and relationally, right? So they want security physically, but they also want security relationally. They want to know that everyone is okay in their circle of relationships. Their biggest struggle or sin is fear and anxiety. So if you want to work through worst case scenarios, a 6 is the one that you want to work through worst case scenarios with because they've already done it in their head. They're constantly doing that. 7 is the enthusiast. A 7's need is to avoid pain or hard feelings or feeling restricted, right? So they're seeking freedom. Their biggest sin or passion is gluttony. Not necessarily around food, although food is one of those things, but they always want more and more experiences, more and more life, more and more friends, more and more everything. Number 8, so an 8 is the challenger. Their need is to be independent and to be self-sufficient. So you'll find a lot of 8s in charge because they don't want other people telling them what to do. And then the 8's biggest sin or struggle is lust, but not necessarily in a sexual way. It's a lust for power. It's wanting more control and power. And then finally, the 9 is the peacemaker. The peacemaker's biggest need is for peace and but peace in a way of they want to be unaffected by life and not have the ups and downs for life cause them lots of difficulty. And their sin or passion is sloth or avoidance, right? So they like to avoid highs and lows. They'll avoid difficult situations. That's just kind of an overview, a quick walkthrough of all of that. That is not enough for you to go, oh yeah, I'm one of these. So what I will say about that is if you don't know your Enneagram number, here's what I encourage you to do. Go get a book about the Enneagram and read it. All right, so there's 2. There's one called The Road Back to You. So we're on the bookshelf. I can't grab it right now, which is kind of it's a good primer for everybody to go through. The second one that actually I find very helpful is The Enneagram Made Easy. It takes the Enneagram and makes it easy. Don't take an assessment until you read one of the books, because If you take an assessment and it tells you this is who you are, then when you read the book, you're looking for those things as opposed to reading the book and trying to see which one of these types fits you. So whenever I'm walking through the Enneagram with somebody, I have them read, we'll do an assessment, but for all of that, it is, okay, the name of the second book is The Enneagram Made Easy. And if you send me an email, I'll send you a copy. I didn't write it, but I'll buy you and send you a copy. And I'll put my phone and email in the chat at the end. So when you think you have identified your number, you need to try that number on for a little while and see how it feels, see how it fits. In any self-assessment type of things, that's true. So if you're taking personality tests, if you're taking a BuzzFeed quiz to find out which Disney princess you are, like you need to confirm that that is true. Because if it's not, it could be the way the questions were worded or those type of things. And it's a problem with the assessment. It's not a problem with you understanding yourself. So just kind of try those numbers on. So I talked about why I struggled with the Enneagram, and this is the ways not to use it in groups. So here's ways not to use it in groups. Using it to label people. Oh, you're a 2, you're a 7, you're an 8, you're a 4, you're a 9. Like we're all going to put that on our name tags, and everyone, because it makes people assume certain things about you that may or may not be true. It's actually close to the same way that it's a way of sorting people in our head. That's not necessarily helpful, because the reality is all of us are more than a number. None of us are purely a 6 or purely a 4 or purely a 2. One of the ways to think about how your number came about is as you were growing up and as your personality was being formed, which most personality is formed by the time you're age 5. So as your personality is being formed, you identify ways that you get to safety. You identify ways that give you life. And those paths become worn in the same way that you go to work the same way every time, right? So coming out of my neighborhood, I can turn left or I can turn right. And both of those get me to a road that leads to work. I always turn left. And so I don't even think about it anymore. I just turn left. That's the way that it is. So thinking about Enneagram numbers, that's part of it. It's the well-worn path that you just naturally go to that path. That doesn't mean you can't access a different path. It just means you're going to naturally go to this path because that's the way you see the world. So that's one. Don't label. Don't diagnose people with it, right? So, oh, this is what's wrong with you. This is why you're struggling with these things, because you're this number. And then the third one is not using it to excuse bad behavior. Self-awareness is only helpful if we work on self-improvement. Understanding things about yourself that you're not going to do anything with isn't actually helpful. So, hey, for example, why don't you, every time we're in a meeting, it seems like you're not engaged in the meetings. Well, that's because I'm a 4 and I'm just disconnected from people. I'm not a 4, but that's because I'm a 4 and that's excusing bad behavior. That's not a reason to be disconnected from meetings, okay? So that's kind of the things, what not to do with Enneagram groups. Now let's talk about how the Enneagram can be helpful in groups. So the first thing that's really helpful, especially if you take your whole group through the Enneagram, is understanding that there are 9 normals, is the way that I would describe it. The Enneagram talks about them as paths or those type of things. The way I describe it is there's 9 normals, which means everyone has a normal way of viewing the world. It's not wrong or right, it's just normal. We all have a self-centric view of seeing the world. We all intake the world through our own filter. And I wish I could remember who said this quote, but nobody sees the world as it is. You see the world as you are, right? So you have all of these filters. Our brains are constantly choosing what to see, what to ignore, all those type of things. So your Enneagram number helps give language around, this is the way you see the world. This is your normal way of seeing the world. using the Enneagram in groups helps us all to, yeah, Abe Lincoln probably helps us all to understand that just because someone else sees the world differently doesn't make them wrong. It just means they have a different normal. And that normal is just as valid and just as helpful and just as real as your normal. So that's really helpful in groups. What it does is it gives us what we've seen in our group and in other groups that are using it, is it gives us more grace for each other. It gives us more grace to understand that it's okay that someone's coming from a different perspective. The reality is, for most of us, if we had the exact same upbringing and the exact same experiences as someone else, we would probably make the exact same decisions that person is making. So when you're looking at somebody and going, hey, this is I can't believe you would make this decision. If you lived their life, you would probably make that exact same decision. And what the Enneagram does for us is it allows us to have that grace and go, hey, if I was that number, and the more you learn about it, the more you learn about individual numbers, I would probably make that decision too. So it gives us the ability to have grace for each other. The third way that it's helpful in groups, right? So one, it allows us to know that there's 9 normals. 2, it gives us grace for each other. 3rd, it allows us to talk about the state of our souls and sins that we are struggling with in a safe and non-judgmental way. So that's why, when I went through all of that and I said the biggest sin or struggle for each one of these Enneagram types, it allows us to talk about that as an Enneagram number and not necessarily talk about it as like my soul is feeling these things. This is what I'm struggling with. That is super helpful, especially for new Christians or folks who may not even be followers of Jesus yet. They will talk to you about their Enneagram number and their soul in a way that they won't talk about it if you say, how is your soul? What's the state of your soul? What sins are you struggling with? They won't talk about that stuff. But if you talk about, hey, as a 3, image management is generally something that most 3s deal with. How does that work in your life? And they'll go, oh yeah, like I'm constantly rewording the truth and shaving things and shading things to make them most positive at all. Well, so they've just confessed to struggling with that, but not in a way that makes them feel this pressure or this guilt as an individual. So that's been super helpful. And then the last one is it helps us break down assumptions, right? So we have a natural inclination to attribute motive to action, right? So I'm saying this poorly, but I'll give you an example that will help, right? So if I'm driving to work and I'm a little bit early, and so I'm taking my time and, I'm stopping at the yellow lights and I'm enjoying the beautiful Savannah weather, and some guy cuts in front of me and, is just zipping in and out of traffic. And I'm like, that guy is a jerk and he's going to get somebody killed. Okay. The next week, I'm now late for a meeting with my executive pastor. I'm zipping in and out of traffic. That light was probably yellow when I went through it. Man, I'm blowing through stop signs because I'm late for a meeting with the executive pastor, right? So obviously it's okay for me to drive like that. But last week, I'm judging the guy who's driving like that because I'm attributing negative motives to his behavior. But in my behavior, we judge others based on their actions. We judge ourselves based upon our motives. So what the Enneagram does is it allows you to attribute positive motives to people. Hey, the reason they're avoiding taking a position on this is because they're a peacemaker and they're seeking peace, and that's more important than getting into conflict around this particular thing. So I can assume a positive motive rather than they're just not engaging because they don't want to talk about hard things. Excuse me. The last thing I want to talk about before you have questions is that the Enneagram in groups allows you to take advantage of other people's strengths. So if someone is a 2, so first of all, you should all try to recruit a 2 in your own personal small group because they are amazing. Because 2s are helpers, right? So they're defined by helpers. So they want to help and they don't necessarily want to be in charge or lead. They want to help. And so if you understand that about somebody, if 2 is not your number, let's say your number is a 3, right? If your number is a 3, you are not necessarily looking for opportunities to do things that are unseen, but a 2 is looking for those things. So as a 3, understanding that you have a 2, you're like, oh, they actually want to do these things that they're not going to get credit for necessarily publicly. The same thing if you're a 2 and there's a 3 in your group, you go, why do they not want to help? Oh, because as a 3, it's very important to them to be seen as successful. So if I want them to do this job, I need to make sure they get public credit for those things. So it's understanding different personality types, different views of normal, and what the need is and what's important to each one of those, and then taking advantage of those things, and not taking advantage in a negative way. Like, I'm not saying dump everything on your 2s. What I'm saying is play, help them use their strengths for those type of things. And that's, like Bill or Steve, whichever one, was talking about shared ownership in the first session. Like, that's how you get to shared ownership around people using their strengths, and not like, I want something for you, as opposed to shared ownership like I need something from you, right? So that's kind of how I've used the Enneagram groups. That's how we've walked through the Enneagram with groups. It is super helpful to, I'm gonna let in it's probably Derek, walking through the Enneagram with our groups and having kind of all of those conversations. Hi, Derek. Around that type of stuff. So all of that amazing information that Derek just missed. And so now I'm going to open it up. So when you signed up for the Enneagram as a, smile for the screen. When you signed up for the Enneagram as or using the Enneagram in groups as your breakout, why did you do that? What questions did you have? You can either type it in the chat or unmute yourself.
Yeah, I jumped in because, I was, interested in hearing how to best lead and care for different types of leaders, knowing that, people are going to receive based on their numbers. They might learn information differently or feel care differently. And so just that's kind of where I kind of jumped in, seeing if I could find different ways and, is it plausible to do things? Does it have to be 9 different ways, or is it 3 different ways with the heart, head, whatever that thing is?
Heart, head, gut triads. That's good.
So yeah, so I was just curious on how you approach those kind of things, or how do you just do you seek out what they are, all those kind of things. So that's my curiosity when it comes to this inside of small groups.
That's good. So I think there's a couple of things around that. So one is that's true outside of the Enneagram as well. So as a small group point person, when you're thinking about your leaders, you want to appreciate them and encourage them in the way that feels like appreciation and encouragement for them, not in the way that you feel appreciation and encouragement, if that makes sense. So I like books. I like to read. So oftentimes I will give a book to all of our group leaders, and some of them really like that, and some of them are like, it's just another book. And so they don't necessarily feel appreciated or encouraged because of that. They might be much more interested in having a conversation around that book with me and going out to coffee. And so part of what I do is kind of keep track of that. So when it comes to the Enneagram in groups, part of that is understanding, oh, they're looking for these things. How can I do that? As the group gets bigger and bigger, it's much more difficult to manage. What Nick was talking about was head, heart, and gut triads. So there are, those are centers of the Enneagram if you've seen the Enneagram in a circle, it's broken down in 3 in the head triad, 3 in the heart triad, 3 in the gut triad. I did that backwards, but that's kind of how we react to things. So I'm not necessarily sure if that would be, I'm thinking out loud here about how that might help with engaging with group members. Maybe. Head folks tend to live in their headspace, right? So they need time to process in their heads, but they also have an internal dialogue and are living there. Heart folks tend to live in the passion space where they are emoting their feelings and those type of things. And then gut folks tend to live in intuition, and how that's how they kind of intake the world, but they'll also experience things in their body. They use their hands a lot when they talk. So that might tell you what triad I'm in. So understand, the more you understand about someone, the more able you are to care for them, to go back to what your question is. So I think the Enneagram is a tool just like anything else. The longer you are with someone, the more you understand about them, the better you are able to care for them, because we want to care for them in the way that they want to be cared for, in the same way that we want to encourage them in the way they want to be encouraged. We want to lead them in the way that they want to be led. That's the most helpful for them. So that kind of addresses what you were talking about, hopefully. And for me, what I do is I cheat, right? So I use technology to help me. So in my group, they don't know this, so don't share this recording with anyone in my group. I have a file on every single one of them that's like, this is their Enneagram number, this is their love language, this is, as I figure those things out, I put it in there, just as a reminder to me to go, all right, this is what's important to them. So when their birthday comes up, do they want a big giant celebration with everybody there, or would they rather have something quiet with just a smaller group of people? I know what I would want, but what I would want is not necessarily what's going to make them feel special. So I cheat and use technology and keep a file on folks like Nick Lindsay. I'm kidding. I might have a file on you. So what? All right. So wait, I'm going to read that question. Do you have people take the Enneagram before they join a group? No. Have people take them once they've started attending a group? No. Or use this as a suggestion for small group leaders? Yes. So we have someone on staff who did extensive work in the Enneagram and has started training Enneagram coaches to walk with people through the Enneagram. For two things, we've used it in a couple of ways. One, with groups, but we don't necessarily advertise it or force it on groups. It's not like all of our groups are using it. That tends to happen through word of mouth. The other way that we've been using it is as a way to reach out to our community and non-believers. It's got a lot of traction right now in a lot of circles. So for example, we engaged with DFACS, which is our Department of Family and Child Services, through adoption stuff, but we also got to talk with them about Enneagram stuff and go down and do an Enneagram seminar with them and talk through their numbers with all of them and connect them with a coach. Now, not all of them are believers and they are dealing with hard stuff. So I want them to be able to talk to a pastor and someone who cares about them and who wants to help them be successful. So the Enneagram's been a door into that again, as I mentioned earlier, has allowed them to talk about their souls in a way that's safe. So that's been really kind of cool. What kind of success have you had using it in groups? What we found in our groups is that as they go through it, it's been a helpful tool for them to feel closer to each other and connect with each other. But really, it's just a filter. It's a way of seeing the world. It's a tool that helps them put language around the way that they see the world, but also the way that other people see the world. And so that's what we've used it as in our groups, as, hey, if you want to connect on a deeper level with your group, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as a first or second study with our groups, but it is something that has helped groups that have been in existence for a while to go to a deeper level with each other. Because they're, I will tell you this, the way I've had one group leader describe it to me: hey, we've done the marriage study, we've done the giving study, we've done the parenting study, like we got all that. That's when I go, awesome. What have you thought about going through the Enneagram? What have you thought about doing some of that other stuff and getting to know each other on a deeper level? Because for a lot of folks who've been following Jesus for a long period of time, like he said, like the parenting study, there's not a whole lot new out of there. I want someone to write a parenting book that says, hey, after you've screwed up your children for the first 10 years, now here's how I can help you. Because everyone writes their parenting book like, start when they're 6 months old and do these things. Great. I've already messed up the first 10 years. Now what am I supposed to do? Side note, sorry. But like that stuff's not necessarily new to them. Same thing with marriage stuff. You know, we're using a 2,000-year-old guidebook. So there's not a whole lot new coming out of that around those particular topics. This allows them to have a deeper conversation around some of those things. So what's the best Enneagram curriculum for a small group? So I would recommend taking the Road Back to You, which has discussion guides in there, and going through that. The Road Back to You walks through each individual type. And so what we encourage groups to do is either take 1 or 2 types a week, read that section, answer those questions, and then have a discussion around that. And then anyone who identifies as that number kind of talks about how this relates in their particular experience. So yeah, so that's kind of what we use for a group that's going through it. We also do facilitated seminars, if you will. It's not really a seminar, but we'll have the group kind of all take an assessment, read the book, and then someone, myself or someone else, will come in as a coach and walk through it with them. And then what we do is we split up the group into 2 or 3 groups based upon triads, head, heart, and gut, and talk with that specific group about the things I was talking about. Like, try this on for a little while, see how this fits. It's not with the Enneagram, because it is understanding your personality and those type of things. It's not a quick process. Like, it's not, hey, 9 weeks later, everybody's got a deep handle on each other. So you just kind of need to be okay with the fact that it's going to be slow and take time for folks to go through that. And that's just okay. Other questions on Enneagram or other stuff? All right, good. So I'm going to look back through my notes and see if there's something else I want to tell you. Oh, so I will tell you this. I'm a 7 with a strong 8 wing. Oh, which Enneagram Made Easy book did you suggest? All right, so it's called the Enneagram Made Easy. It's like the Enneagram for Dummies here, so I'll show you. All right, so this is the Adventurer, which is a 7. And then it's got like a little checklist to go through a personality inventory, and you're going, oh yeah, that's true of me. Oh, that's true of me. Oh, that's true of me. That's true of me. And then it'll tell you like how to get along with a 7, what 7s like to do, what's hard about being a 7, how they react in relationships. It tells me I shouldn't have married my wife, you know, because she's a 1 and I'm a 7 and they don't gel. I'm just kidding. I mean, it does say that, but we've been married for 26 years, so we're okay. But one of the things to know about 7s, this is actually a good illustration. They always play for the joke. They're always trying to go for the joke because they're always trying to bring fun and avoid hard things. And so in a hard conversation or stuff like that, a 7's always going to try and lighten it up and bring sarcasm and humor into it. As a 7, that's something for me to recognize about myself, but it is also something that's helpful for the group to go, hey, he's not just trying to be a comedian. Like, that's a 7's mechanism for avoiding pain. And they can point that out to me in my group. So they will say things like, hey, you don't need to play for the joke every time. That's something I had to learn as a 7 that was helpful for me. How do I say the jokes in my head and not say them out loud? That Carrie, Nick gave you my email, and then that's my cell phone. So you can call, text, whatever. I live on the East Coast. Do not disturb turns on my phone at 11 p.m. and goes off at 5 a.m. So unless you're in a Mexican jail, you're not going to get through between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. And the reason I say Mexican jail, I told you I was in the Navy for 23 years. I have gotten a phone call from a Mexican prison Somebody who needed my help. Um, so, so that's my email and phone number. And I will tell you, I'm happy to talk about anything you want, groups related, life related, why the Eagles are going to have a crappy season this year. Um, so, uh, oh, awesome. Um, and so I love talking groups. I love just connecting with people. The small group network has been tremendous for me in just walking through things, getting to know people, but also hard questions like, hey, this is what's going on in my church, and I'm not sure how to deal with that. I will tell you, Steve puts his cell phone number out there, text him. He'll call you back. He'll walk through that stuff with you. Absolutely will. Um, and so I love that about the network. So I try to live that way as well. I will also tell you, I will give you anything you want because I stole it all from Steve Gladen and Bill Willits. So you can have it all. So.
Yeah, Steve, there's a good question from Aaron Moore. It says, have you had any pushback from people in your staff or groups when you've suggested doing the Enneagram together?
Yes. So we've had people tell us that it is from Satan. Depending on what you look at and where you Google and those type of things, so here's the reality. Nobody really knows the deep history of the Enneagram. There are people out there that have ideas around it and they'll track it to different things about when it showed up in literature, but people don't necessarily know where it actually came from. This is the position that I take with stuff like that. If it's helpful for you, it's just a tool. It's not the gospel. It's not going to transform your soul the way the Holy Spirit will. It's not Jesus. It's not any of those things. And we don't treat it like it's any of those things. We treat it like what it is, which is a tool to help you have language around understanding your way of seeing the world and a tool for understanding the way other people see the world. Again, the helpful parts of it. And so what I always go back to is this is what I have found helpful around the Enneagram. We've definitely had people react negatively and say, you shouldn't do that. With this is what I'll say. It actually was helping us prepare for coming back to church after COVID because we deal with all of the stuff about we shouldn't be meeting or we should be meeting. We should or should not be wearing masks. Like the reality is on anything, you're going to find people on both sides of the issue. What we have is a number of people on staff who found it very helpful. We've also got someone on staff who's done a lot of extensive work in it. And so we have the advantage of if someone's really upset about it, I'm going to connect them, and I'm happy to connect you to a guy named Mike Frazier, who has done extensive work in it, who can talk through that stuff with them about that stuff. But I don't like long arguments. I don't even like to get into theological debates about stuff like that. One, because people have been arguing about theological debates for 2,000 years, way smarter than I am, and they haven't got it figured out yet. And two, I think it hurts the relationship. And so I'm always going to come from a place of relationship. So for us, that's where we try to come at it and deal with that stuff on an individual basis. We haven't had like a big outcry or any of that stuff from the Enneagram. But again, we don't necessarily promote it. Like we're not the Church of the Enneagram or any of that type of stuff. It is just a tool that we use that's super helpful for people. Other questions? We've got like 5 minutes left.
What about handling Enneagram abusers? So in other words, the people who are, putting people into boxes, those kind of things where it's just like going beyond what I think, using the tool as an aggressive as opposed to, being useful.
Yep, that's good. So yes, that happens, especially right after somebody has done a little reading on the Enneagram. Like that is generally when I see the most labeling happening and the most identifying of people. Oh, you're this and you're that and you're that. I think there's two things that are helpful to remember. One, the Enneagram's a tool. So just like a hammer, it can be used to bludgeon people or it can be used to build things, right? And so the Enneagram is the same way. It can be used to bludgeon people. It can be used to build things. So if that's happening, I have I or someone else tries to have a conversation with them. The other thing is, as we enter into that space with people, if someone's asking about the Enneagram, we try and set that stuff up at the beginning. Like, don't use it to label, don't use it to excuse bad behavior, and don't use it to diagnose people. Now, our staff still does that to each other. So I'm just going to be real, right? It's not like I live in this perfect world. Our staff still does that to each other. What I personally do is call it out. Is if someone on our staff is using it to label me or someone else, I go, hey, and don't use the Enneagram to label somebody like that. If you've got a problem with them, it's not because of their number. It's because of whatever. It's because of the situation, not who that person is. And so I just try and call that stuff out. But there are definitely people who will do that. Other questions? Anyone like, well, I'm this number, so what does that mean? All right, well then I'm gonna wrap us up. So again, like I said, if you send me an email, I will send you Enneagrams, the Enneagram Made Easy, just because I think it's a helpful tool to walk through, and it's not as heavy and reading as the Road Back to You, though I do recommend the Road Back to You as well. If you have any questions, want to talk more about this, want to walk through exploring your personal number, I'm happy to do that with you as well. So just send me an email, scurran@compassionchristian.com, or text me, 912-572-5319. Should I do it like the radio guys? That's 912-572-5319. scurran@compassionchristian.com, 912-572-5319. All right. Thank you all for being here. I had a great time. Hopefully this was helpful for you.